Shri Matre Namaha.
Shri Matre Namaha Shana.
Welcome again, Vinita ji, and welcome viewers to this beautiful Navratri special. Navratri is often celebrated with rituals, devotion, and dance. But today I wanted to go deeper, as Vinita ji and I often do. Beyond the lamps and the diyas and the colors, Navratri is really about Shakti, which is what we often discuss in our podcast, which is the force of creation and destruction that lives within all of us. In this conversation today with Vinita ji, we're going to explore Shakti not just as a goddess on a pedestal, but as the energy moving through our grief, our shadows, our desires, egos, and even our own laughter. We talk about what it means to face ourselves honestly, to burn our masks, and to walk through suffering and loss, and to find lightness on the other side. This is a conversation about empowerment, awakening, and remembering the purpose of life itself in the midst of chaos. I can't wait for you all to listen. Welcome again, Vinita ji.
It's my privilege and honor to be here, Shama, and to address everyone who's tuning in and to give the message of Shakti, which I think is so urgent and important at this time of divisiveness, polarity, and of course, to escape from what we all know as the prison of patriarchy that we are all victims of.
Yes, especially in this 3D plane, we're victims of so many societal and cultural self-imposed prisons even, and I am so appreciative that we have this platform to discuss these kind of topics. And especially right now during Navratri, I think it's very prevalent because we come from a beautiful culture where we have such beautiful celebrations, celebrating Devi in all of her 9 forms. And we talk about Devi's 9 forms. But I started to realize that often it's not my higher self invoking the goddess, it's the wounded little girl inside of me. She is often hungry for approval, terrified of rejection, and then she ends up running the show. So, within life, I, as well as all of us, whether we choose to admit it or not, we mistake coping for living. And I know so many of us live this way, where we mistake our wounds for our identity. And then when we come to worship Devi, Shakti, while still carrying that unhealed child within. So, yeah, it's just like the more that I sit with myself and I self introspect, the more that I realize how utterly absurd I can be. And I think it's just so refreshing when we can call our own stuff out. I used to think that every inconvenience was the end of the world. Every rejection used to mean that I was unlovable. Every little thing that didn't go my way was catastrophic. And now I look back because really, how dramatic can we be? We turn everything into an existential crisis. We turn a small failure into a life sentence. And, I think this is what ego does. And perhaps this is what Devi Shakti is trying to show us, where we are imprisoning ourselves. And yet when we finally see it, it's hilarious. We're just little children throwing tantrums in grown up bodies, wearing fancy clothes, paying bills, scrolling endlessly, escaping, and ultimately pretending like we're the ones in control. So that's what I'm beginning to realize. And I would love to hear more on your thoughts, where when we can laugh at ourselves, at our own masks, and how tragedy can really be a comedy. And that's ultimately maybe what Devi is trying to illuminate within us, that it doesn't deny our pain, but it liberates us perhaps from being enslaved in it. It's almost just like Devi telling us, wake up and stop making such a serious deal out of life. And yeah, so I think that my first question is going to be to you. Do you think that during Navratri and in general, how can humor be a spiritual practice? Like the ability to laugh at ourselves, at the masks that we wear, is that the highest form of consciousness?
See, what Ma Lalita brings to the table in the Dashamahavidyas is that she says to us, this is all just a play. So when we start to worship her, we see her as an 8-year-old girl, very playful, very childlike, and just going about the world unbothered by everything that's happening around her. And somewhere down the line, all of us lose that innocence, that childlike nature, and then become these serious individuals who think the world revolves around ourselves. The message for me of every Navratri is the same, that this is the time when you have to discover yourself. The feminine energy in you is at its height. So align with it and make way for your authentic self to show itself. Because Shama, the truth is, and these lines just came to me this morning, that they may or may not be ghee on your parantha. There may or may not be ghee on your idli, but for sure there is guilt and shame which is served up on your plate as a South Asian woman. As an Indian woman, okay, there is always a side serving of why did you do it this way or why did you not do this? We are never ever going to be able to escape this unless we make the conscious choice. And Navratri, with the heightened energy of Ma, is the best time for us to shove this plate away and to just have a fresh plate where we are not served any of this. See, because from my own lived experience, from the experiences of everyone around me, I'm talking to people, doing sessions throughout the day, largely with women. One commonality that I see is this: the guilt and the shame is not very far away in the conversation. It comes up in the first 2 or 3 minutes, like the invisible salt that's in all our food. It pervades it. Now, this is what we have to remove. And just like it's difficult to remove salt once it's added in the food, all of these emotions that we have grown up believing is us, is what makes our identity, needs to go.
And so much of our adulthood is our childhood wounds in disguise, like the boy who had to be strong or the girl who had to please. How can Navratri help us see when it's our inner child running our lives? And how does that awareness reconnect us to Shakti?
See, the main message from Shakti is to leave behind everything. If you look at Navratri as the 9-day celebration, which is then divided into 3 parts. So you start with Mahakali, and then you go into the energy of Mahalakshmi, and then finally you end with Mahasaraswati. So you start with what is originally inertia. So perhaps we are at that stage where we are allowing our previous experiences, our previous life learnings to percolate into life as it is now. So from tamas, we move into a more rajasic guna, the nature, where we are working towards becoming the best version of ourselves or working towards our spiritual evolution, however you want to say that or term it. And then finally, last 3 days, where we allow the sattva guna to come out to balance us and to bring forth the best of everything that life has to offer. Because if we look at it with fresh eyes, with a fresh perspective, there's always going to be something positive that we can find. So I think the thought is that you start with this tamas, the inertia, and work with yourself in the stillness of your mind, in the quiet of your solitude, which is so difficult for every one of us because it's only when we are alone that the masks come off. And that's why we are so afraid of being.
It makes so much sense because then we ultimately have to confront ourselves. And those masks, they can be in the form of the achiever, the provider, the seeker, whatever attributes that we claim to have. And are these ultimately the demons that Devi is slaying? Like, are these ego identities a form of the egoic illusions that we can use to basically use the fire during Navratri to burn these personas and live in our authenticity?
See, the entire Devi Mahatmya is written in such a way that it points out the different psycho spiritual qualities within us which need to be dismantled. So, whether it's a Madhu Kaitavya, which Mahakali is battling. Madhu means the sweetness. So, what is the sweetness? It's the sweetness of pleasures that we see. This unending dopamine rush that we are looking for, whether it's via the internet or whether it's via our addiction to anything sweet or addiction to even things like Coke or anything at all, any kind of addiction. It's like an endless pursuit of pleasure. So Madhu is trying to vanquish that seeking of pleasure. Is everything that's hard and rigid and fibrous within us, which resists change, which Mahakali needs us to put an end to. And so, if you look at every single Asura that is battled in the Devi Mahatmya, so take Rakta Bija, for example, where every drop of this Asura's blood, when it hits the ground, gives rise to hundreds of other Asuras. This is similar to our desires. You fulfill one desire only to realize that 100 other desires have sprung because it's that one moment of joy that you get from the purchase, and then you want to amplify that, you want to magnify that. So one purchase then goes up to becoming like 100 purchases, and then it becomes like an endless pursuit of what ultimately it doesn't mean anything. And then you feel the emptiness once you get back home and you've done the unboxing, and then it's like, oh, I'm feeling that emptiness all over again. So I think all of
Yes.
these asuras are giving us an indication of what is the psycho spiritual element within myself that I need to grapple with and come to terms with.
And it's really interesting that you used the dopamine loop because that's really what it is that whether we want something like a new product or a new job or validation, attention, anything. It gives us that rush because we're using that external factor. We're outsourcing our to those situations, people, things, etc. And that in itself, like you said, it gives rise to millions and millions of other desires. And it's just never ending. Like when is it going to end? Right. And how can we put an end to that and just say, want to incinerate all of this and just not have them multiply.
Shama, that is going to be practically impossible because this has been handed down to us from several generations of women who have gone through the exact same seeking of validation. See, one thing that patriarchy does very well is it silences you. And when you're silenced and there is no outlet for you to find recourse, to find pleasures, or to find joy in yourself. You get the utmost pleasure out of someone telling you that the parantha tasted good. I keep going back to the analogy of food simply because that's just such a simple human endeavor which everyone can identify with. If you observe an Indian woman, she wants validation. She will ask with every parantha, parantha theek hai? Parantha acha hai? Okay. It's because that's the only validation she's going to get in the day for all the work she's put in. Nobody's going to come and tell you you did your laundry well or that you did the dishes well or you've made the dishes shiny. No. So how do we battle this? Much as it may sound really, really crude for me to say all of this, but this is the reality that we all have to face because I see myself doing that. I want validation for every cup of coffee that I serve to someone. And where is this coming from? Because this is how I have seen women in my life seek their validation, and I don't know any better. Now, it's time for me to break this generational curse so that going forth, going into the future, the girls who are born after me should realize that there is much more to life than seeking validation for everything from external sources. And how do we do this? It's a lot of conscious work. Every step of the way, we ask ourselves, am I worth it or am I not? If I'm not worth it, then why am I even doing this? Because my self worth is determined by me first. Only then will I move forward in life. So it has to just be, you have to be very present in every moment. That's the only way to battle this. There is no other way. And I think this awareness, even if you practice it just for 9 nights or 9 days of the Navratri, it then slowly becomes second nature. That's why the Navratris don't occur once a year. They occur 4 times a year so that you are reminded of these same life lessons again and again so that you could apply them practically in your life in an everyday atmosphere or environment.
I really resonate with that so much, especially as a woman looking for that validation in sometimes in just our own existence. It's like we reduced ourselves to just wanting, needing, begging for those types of scraps of validation. And I know it's not just women because I know that men have a different struggle that they can't access that level of, or not even access, but they're not encouraged to access that level of, I don't want to even say femininity because that might just be looked down upon in expressing it that way, but just they're a little bit of their feminine nature. Like there's like a hardened stance that they have to take to over intellectualize. So it seems to be that the patriarchy is working against both men and women. And that causes a lot of numbing and escapism. And I think that's what also gives rise to all of these egoic illusions and addictions and the demons that you're speaking of. And whether that be addiction to work or social media, shopping, it's like as though men and women we've been numbing Shakti's voice. And I love that you said that it's important to reconnect with ourselves instead of escaping, and that takes that level of introspection and really knowing ourselves, right? Because it's easy to sit in victim consciousness because life is difficult for everybody. And it's really easy just to say, I resign, I give up, I'm gonna flag, things are hard, and everybody faces tragedies. Everybody's going to lose somebody. There's going to be heartbreak. There's going to be the loss of loved ones and just world tragedies in general. And I think that like for me it's difficult because I see that level of destruction creation not just in the worldview but also just within myself. Who I am today is not who I am this time last year, and we're just always evolving and growing, and we can choose to either stay in that place of victim consciousness and in that comfort zone, or we can choose to slay those metaphorical demons and rise above that, right? And there's a fine line, I think, between in between spiritual bypassing and just saying like, okay, like it's all dharma, it's all this, and then just reducing it to that intellectual concept versus actually sitting with the discomfort, actually taking that metaphorical sword and obliterating those inner demons. And I think that pain is definitely a portal. And I think that Shakti's way of breaking this open is for us to access those deeper truths. So even human suffering, for example, we can all question it and just be like, what's the point? Like life is going to go on, even with losses of loved ones or anything important. And it just seems meaningless sometimes. But death is the only certainty in life. And whether that be physical death or identity death, illusions. So how can we see those endings as sacred micro deaths, like part of Shakti's cycle of renewal instead of resisting them with despair and cynicism?
Interesting thought. Micro deaths. I like how you use that word because in French, we use a term petit mort for every sleep that you go into. It's like a micro death in a way. And also, I think here it's not inappropriate to say that there's a very fine line between the mystic and the psychotic. They are both in the same ocean. The mystic manages to swim, the psychotic will drown. It's the same ocean, remember. So I think it's the perspective we bring. But to go back to your earlier question before I answer this about the point you just brought up, why we women more than men feel this pain so much, feel this urge to look inward, the seeking of validation. It goes back to how we have been brought up, where we were always told that don't talk too loudly, don't dress this way, don't be this way, don't ask too many questions. The boys were never taught. So, to that extent, they are exempted from having to live out that. And also, this huge, the aura of goodness and grace and all of that, which we crown women with. We're supposed to be good. See, a bad man is still very likable. He can still be the object of desire and fantasy, but a bad woman, no, no, no. So I think this is against societal conditioning that as now, we can change this. And for every aspect of Navratri, this is what we have to sit down and do. Write out what is it that I think of as my inner demon. So list 9 or 10, and then you can give them a name if you want, just like how they did in the Devi Mahatmya. Call it Mahishasura, call it Chandamunda, call it Dhumralochana. For example, I find Dhumralochana very interesting as a demon because he's the one with smoke filled eyes. Isn't that what we all are? Our illusions cloud our eyes. So, in a way, we are all leading these crazy delusional lives, telling ourselves we are this or we are that, or our ego determines how successful or how not successful we feel we are, when that's not at all the reality. So, if we can all do this and just list out our own internal demons, and then you go pick up that sword to fight it. Because if you don't even know it exists, what are you fighting?
True. That's very true. Yeah, we have to identify what it is within ourselves that needs to be transformed. It's easy to just judge ourselves and say, well, I have all of these flaws and all of these demons, but the truth is, we all do. Sometimes we learn to dance with them and sometimes we let them control us. So we have to choose what it's going to be, right?
More often than not, we will allow them to control us because that's how we've lived our lives. We have always given into control, to parental control, societal control. And now it's difficult because that's the comfort zone we are in. We know what it's like when we obey authority figures. And it's going to be a much tougher life when we step up and say, I'm no longer going to be afraid of the authority. So that's the transition. That's the transformation that we have to make. And it sounds very glib. It's like, okay, here we are, two educated women sitting and talking to each other about patriarchy and polarities and all of that. But the truth is that the reality is much more complicated than what you and I can ever fathom. Still, we all have to do the work because if there's one message of Devi Mahatmya, I keep going back to the Devi Mahatmya because that's where the whole Navratri celebration comes from. It is the larger narrative is that there is a rishi whose name is Medhas, and he is approached by two individuals. So one is a king, the other is a commoner, he's a merchant. The whole point of Rishi Medhas telling us the stories of all of these demons and Devi's fight with them is to show us that regardless of where we are on the social ladder, the problems that beset humanity are all the same. It does not change. So you could be in that top 1%, or you could be at the bottom rung, just like a daily wage laborer. But the problems we are going to have are all either that we have physical challenges, mental health issues, relationship issues, financial issues. Problems will persist even if you're rich. Doesn't mean that the problems with wealth go away. There are different set of problems with wealth when you're rich versus when you're poor. The problems remain the same. So the Devi Mahatmya is telling us that regardless of everything else, this is Sage Medhas's final like decision on the matter, that the problems pertaining to humanity will remain the same. And it is for us to convert or to transmute all of these challenges into a victory over all of them. So, be it over evil, be it over injustice, be it over whatever it is that you're feeling.
I love the way that you phrase that, transmuting, because ultimately, when we alchemize that pain or whatever it is that we're feeling, it is part of the human experience, right? Like you said, we can be a king, we can be a pauper, we can be in any area of life. Definitely having that wealth can make certain things easier, a lot more comfortable. But the human experience still remains as is, and there is still no guarantee. One day the king might be a pauper, and vice versa. So like there is always that possibility of and it's just being able to transmute, like you said. So it's taking that difficulty or that discomfort and choosing to push through it, but at the same time, for like not letting it control us, but allowing ourselves to rise above it and as well as accept it instead of shutting it down, right? Because I think when we don't give it a voice or we don't acknowledge it to some degree, that it becomes a shadow. And living in shadows that live in the dark, if we don't shine a light to it, it just kind of it becomes a perpetual cycle of confusion and a lot more illusions, I'm sure.
Shama, what I have discovered, especially given how the geopolitical scenario is panning out in today's world, it's what polarization is all about, trying to make your voice heard. So now we are caught in the cusp between these two dangers, shouting you down. The past week, out of 40 men, 40 women who have, I think it shows that women are really keen to find out how to move forward. And there is no denying that there is an occasional man who also wants to understand how to work with the divine feminine. But it is incumbent upon us women. We have to think of ourselves as the Shakti Sena, and we have to move forward, are the ones who give rise to civilization as we know it.
That civilization is the matrix that we're living in, right? Because it keeps us away from what ultimately is real. And when you mentioned in the earlier conversation that when we sit with ourselves, we give ourselves that silence, that's when we can access it, right? So right now, what the world is trying to do is it's saying perform, do, distract, numb, and it just becomes a cycle. And then ultimately, living in that hamster wheel of an existence, we lose all meaning. And it does seem meaningless because it just seems like an endless pursuit for more. And more of what? More things, more accolades, more recognition, more wealth. And in between,
I see of late, especially with the younger generation, that they are constantly hankering after experiences. Path told that, you know what, there's no experience here. And if there is, you have to discount it and disregard it because it's only coming in your path. They lose interest and go away. So, this hankering after experiences, even much more than hankering after the physical, very
and it's that instant gratification that keeps us in that dopamine loop because we're living in this world that's like, okay, we have a one click thing to order something or to just get anything that we want. So the truth is that we cannot sit in discomfort. And that's why we overdo, over intellectualize, and it just we don't know who we are, why we're here. We're existing, we're not living. And I think it's really sad to think about that most people don't even think about it that way. They're just like, okay, it's life. I'm just gonna wake up and go and work and do that and then not think of anything else and just like watch the same thing and drink myself into oblivion or escape into whatever without even really questioning anything. Or even if there's a question, it becomes so uncomfortable that it's just like, okay, you know what? I can't do this. It becomes like an existential crisis, but that's so uncomfortable that it's just like it can't be worked through, you know? If it is, like what I've noticed in myself is like I used to think it was so serious and it would just be like the spiritual path is so serious and I would take myself so seriously. And when I mentioned earlier, like now I can laugh at myself. I know for certain I am far from perfect. Difference is that I've become a lot more self-aware and a lot more accepting of my demons. I'm able to dance with my demons now. You know, I can slay them, trying to slay them for sure. You know, it's a daily battle. But it's also beautiful to be able to perceive life as like, yes, it's difficult. Yes, it's sad to see a lot of tragedy in the world, but it's also beautiful. And I think being able to sit with that perspective and see that there is a bigger reason that we may not know. So, yes, I think ultimately thinking that we're in control is what really imprisons us, right?
Illusion of control. We don't know what thought is going to come to us next. And we think that we are in control. I think for all of us to understand that we are not the thought, we are not the thinker of the thought, we are mere life starts to make sense. Because that's when you realize that this illusion of control is only to keep you interested in this mate. Life is going to happen regardless of what action we take, game of life.
Yeah. We're so terrified, right, as people that we cling on to those identities that we were referring to before, especially not just as like Indian women, but I think of women in general, even men, where we do want to identify with certain aspects and traits within ourselves. We're just so terrified that if the mask falls, we will be loved. So it's not really, so then it begs the question, like, is it really death that we fear, or is it the death of the persona that we don't survive, right? Because to be able to live authentically is to allow those masks to go and allow ourselves to be fully seen, first by ourselves and then by the world at large, which is imperfect, messy, and real.
Back to this point about micro death and about how of cells fresh book. For me, I think more afraid of than the actual physical death, which happens as an eventuality. Stand up and fight against what we've been told. Then, in a way, that is a micro death, which we are not ready for and which society is not going to let us forget. If at all we do stand up, then you will be branded terms fitting in where you were a part of something to a greater dichotomy. So much more.
Because there's so much dissonance. There's so much cognitive dissonance then because we're not even sure of who we are. We're going through the motions. We're thinking something else, feeling something else, doing something else. So then, how do we reconcile all of that? We can't, right? And that's ultimately what the most difficult thing is that it wants us to be disconnected.
So all the work that side of when just the 0.1% of your, as opposed to the 99 point whatever percent, where you're just spending, taking in inputs from social media, from the television, from the news channels, from the people around you. It's all coming from outside. When is the only time when you allow your inner voice to come up? That's when you're doing the sadhana. That is the reason why it's necessary to have some kind of practice, because that is when you're doing the internal work, not affected by what's going on around you, not bothered about all of those finger pointers, though not seeking the validation. Because what validation can anyone give you for the internal work that you do?
Exactly.
So important. It's imperative, especially for us women, because see, men still get their validation. They're out there, they're the providers most often. And they are, see, it's like 8 or 9 hours spent at work and then they hang out with their buddies. Not to discount the fact that they have their difficulties, but by and large, number one, they're not looking for the validation. And number two, they are not dealing with the kind of emotional stuff that we deal with. So to that extent, they're exempt from all of this.
Yeah, there's different struggles that they have, but I think it's more so of the blind spots that they have. Whereas with us, like it's a lot more we were trained to behave in a certain way or to suppress and such. And I think that definitely both are true in different ways. Yeah, and just going back to the point of being able to sit in sadhana, I think that basically historically, isn't it true that we didn't know what was going on in so many parts of the world? And now that we have social media, we have outlets, we know what tragedies are occurring and how many people are dying, and this is happening and that's happening. And before, we would only know when somebody in the tribe had passed. And even that, it was like probably a beautiful send off because it would be a celebration of life and not this, like the way that it becomes such a tragic thing nowadays. And yes, like these things are sad, but I don't think that we're meant to know and process so many of these type of worldly situations. It just seems almost like it doesn't seem natural, right? Like to do that because then how can we sit in our sadhana if we're looking at the news and we're like, this is how many people died in this state and in this country. And it's just like we're just constantly consuming and feeling that we're not able to sit with ourselves. And then we feel guilty because we're just like, well, I'm desensitized now, so I can't even feel for people. And I think that's just the disconnect that the world puts us in now. That too much of a good thing where we are overly connected in the form of news and social media, it can also be very limiting to our own self. You can be connected outwardly, but so disconnected from within.
Like you said, very limiting to very debilitating as well. Because also earlier, to go back to your saying in the tribe, a certain success in the tribe as well. Today, you and I have to actually think of every other woman who's on Instagram as a competitor for our attention, for every single thing. She's more beautiful than I am. She's possibly more intelligent than I am. She's got more followers than me. So you've just suddenly gone from playing a game at a village level to being at the Olympic level of competition. And that does nobody any good, which is, I think, another thought which comes to me. Use the Navratri as a time for digital. 9 days or 9 nights, say, okay, for these number of hours, I'm off all devices. Perhaps that will lend some kind of perspective. It's like nowadays, these dark retreats are becoming very popular, where you just, we've had this in Ayurveda always. We've had the Kuti Pravesha, it used to be called, where you just would go into a kuti, into a little hut with no light, with just very bare minimal food, and you would come out as a renewed, recharged, refreshed individual. And now I think it's a similar kind of experiment that people are trying. What essentially happens is there's a shift of perspective. You suddenly realize that you feel good without the doom scrolling. You feel good without the comparison. And you feel so good that you really want to throw away the devices forever. But the moment we come back from the detox, the temptation is to just fear of missing out. So you scroll even more. That's the risk. So if we can use this time carefully to see what we can weed out, it would be a Dasara well spent, a Navratri well spent.
I love it. Yeah. And instead of the fear of missing out, we should be fearing fitting in, you know?
True.
We should be like, I don't want to fit into this matrix anymore. I want to deprogram because, I'm just like laughing just thinking about it because like here we are spiraling about so many different things and acting like we're carrying all of the universe's responsibilities. And in the same breath, I see my son, who's almost 2. He's completely mesmerized by umbrellas. His favorite word is umbrella. He's mesmerized by umbrellas and in awe of white feathers when he sees them. So it's like as though he's in awe of the simple things, as though it's the greatest show on earth. And then I'm sitting here like, who's the enlightened one here? Right? Like me with my endless anxieties and thought loops and stuff, or him with his pure joy over an umbrella. Adults, after we're so programmed and conditioned, we become so ridiculous. We dramatize everything and we just cling. So I really love that you said to detox and to really sit with ourselves, because the truth is that we can get lost in this zoo of a world because there's enough to get lost in, especially with the overly connectedness world that we're living in. So I think it's important to really go within ourselves into the darkness, like you were saying, go into the internal cave and shine that dia within.
When
Most
you say,
beautiful thing that we
the interconnectedness that you feel via the devices, it's actually hyperconnectedness, which again is detrimental because of all the people who are following you on the internet, how many would actually come to your rescue if you need to speak with someone? And this has been a question which has been around for quite some time, since the time of Facebook followers. But it gathers traction even more now because we feel empowered by the number of followers or by the number of people we've befriended on LinkedIn or on Instagram. But really, are you connecting with the people in your own life? There is a greater disconnect with actual physical people and a closer connection with perhaps these devices and what they promise. And with the coming of AI, that is going to get further skewed because already I see this happening, that people are actually using Chat GPT as a friend to go and cry, and tell out all their woes because the tone of Chat GPT, extremely sycophantic. So it will pretend like it's your greatest fan and you can do no wrong. And that also starts to give you a dopamine hit with time. To think that, oh, here's this, what is called like a super intelligence, an artificial intelligence telling me that I'm so great and I'm destined for this and I'm destined for that. And then it becomes addictive, very, very detrimental to mental health and very difficult to get out of the clutches of again.
Yes, it becomes a crutch, right? Because I see that happening so much too. And it just seems like it's scary to see what's going to happen after, because if people are using it as a crutch for so many things, it's scary to know what's going to happen in the mental health landscape and how it's going to impact people on a long-term level, because what they're really doing is just enabling themselves by the use of artificial intelligence. And it is an intelligence, but it's still
Sure,
artificial.
for sure. It's an intelligence. And I would say it's not even a crutch anymore, Shama. It's almost like we are in the wheelchair. It's that extent of dependence that I'm seeing already. And I really dread to think of what the coming years have in store. Scary.
This is why we need Shakti more than ever. Oh, this is why we need to go internally and not go to the artificial intelligence, go to the actual real intelligence, right? And when we can access that from within, when we can access the Shiva and Shakti from within, ChatGPT is nothing.
When you say that we have to reach out to Shakti, I can often Churchill. For some reason, I don't know why this of World War II. Churchill makes this fabulous speech in the House of Parliament where he says, we will fight them in the air, we will fight them in the sky, or at sea and all of that. A piece of elocution, as it were, says about these words. Someone asks him, what just happened in there? He says he mobilized the English language and sent it into battle. So perhaps it's time for us to mobilize whatever our resources are, if it's our command over the language, if it's our ability to solve other people's mental problems, whatever it is, we utilize it, claim whatever it is that we can
Yes,
for the common good of humankind. Here,
yes.
it's not, I think already when you're on the spiritual path, when you reach a certain stage, you don't think masculine, feminine, man, woman, gender, all of that ceases to exist. All we have to consciousness because see, in Sanatana, in our religion, we are told that Brahmas from the source level, macroscopic level, macrocosmic level, it doesn't matter. And for us to go and reclaim the fact that we are the source, it's going to take a back source, which is available to us, whether it be semantics, ontology, philosophy, whatever it takes.
Yes, and I think the most important thing would be authenticity, right? Because to have other people also simultaneously awaken, they need to see that they're not alone in this and that we are all imperfect human beings just struggling and figuring it out and trying, taking 5 steps forward, 3 steps back constantly. But it's just being able to call ourselves out with that compassion and that grace. And I think that being able to do that instead of pretending that we are perfect or that we have it all figured out or we're living in our fear or we're avoidant and we're just like, you know what, like I'm just so traumatized by life that this is just all I know. It's just having that openness with ourselves will allow for a deeper awakening with others too, I think.
Hear all of this. But how does a person, an individual, to bear some meaning in their lives? Very simply, just for those in condescending, the terminology which they are used to using throughout the year. Because we hear this, see, when I'm doing my sessions, I hear women say to me that, he allowed me to work or he allowed me to study. When they're talking about either their father or their spouse, day and age, are we still using this language? Because what about our agency? Now, as a man, if you can respect a woman for what she brings to the table, I'll give you an example from yesterday where there's a lady I'm speaking with, um, and she is ashamed to say that she's a housewife. And I know that everyone, every person who is guiding someone else goes through this at some point where you're shaking them up and saying, look, you've done probably the most difficult task on earth, which is to manage the home, to bring up the kids, and to handle everything. Whereas the man was and still you don't give yourself any value and you cut yourself down, you shrink down to a point where you're saying, I'm ashamed to say I'm just a housewife. This, it's so unfortunate, but it's every man out there, please respect the woman, love her, cherish her, at least for these 9 nights, and then we would see if you can integrate it into your everyday life. Because unless a man treats every woman with respect, however great a Devi Sadhaka is, he is, it's not going to help. Have to see the divinity in every individual. So that is not just for the one against women, even for men. You have to see the divinity in every being, in every creature. And for women, during Navratri, this is the time for you to stand up for yourself, even if it's just for a short period of time, for these 9 nights, to say, look, I'm not going to seek validation for anything that I do, to just understand what gives you joy and to pursue it. Tall order. I know that it's impossible for women, given the responsibilities that they have, to even seek a couple of days off. You know why spiritual journeys are so popular, Shama, in India? Because that's the only time a woman can go away from home without feeling the guilt that she's abandoning the family.
Yes.
And this is so unfortunate because a woman, if she wants to go away and she wants to think, she wants the solitude to figure out her head, she should have the ability, the freedom to do that.
Right. Without the guilt and without the fear of judgment. And yeah, it just seems like meant to, we're not meant to actually do these things unless we're given some kind of permission that we outsource something.
Fallen into this trap, and we ourselves start to feel the guilt and the shame and the fear, and it just resides there. It just stays there and will pass with us only when we go to the grave, which I feel is so tragic.
Yeah.
Even if it's just for a couple of years, if you can reclaim what's yours or agency over life itself, then that is what Navratri is all about. And to think that this is a culture which glorifies Devi. It says she is the most powerful, she is Anuttara, she is unsurpassed. And then what do you do to her? You give her permission, even for the smallest of things.
So she's the most powerful. We give her permission. We reduce her into a child,
Shrink her into a matchbox. And she's sitting there comfortably until she starts knocking. And then when she knocks, nobody wants to hear because now that knock can actually shake up the entire globe.
Yes.
So they will not let you knock. They will put a stop to it even before the knock gets loud.
Yeah.
See, we might come across as two women who, in spite of all our privileges, in spite of everything that we've done and we've uh, gone through in life, we can come across as these flag bearers, these badge wearing feminists, but it's not that. I
Which
was
is,
not this woman, Shama. I am not apologizing for who I am today, but I was not this woman. Even
I
a
was not
couple of
either
years ago,
here. I was
I
very
always thought it was
shy.
such a privilege to be born a woman. And I still believe that in my heart, I wouldn't have it any other way. But it's not because I want something to change in my life. I've been very fortunate. I've had really good people around me. My in laws were fabulous. My parents were wonderful. Everyone around me has been super, super, super supportive. I'm not talking for myself here when I talk, but when I see all the other people who are suffering, all the other women who come to me with their grief, is when I feel, okay, I got away, but so many millions of them did not. And I have to be the voice for them.
I really respect and admire that so much, Vinita ji. And I think that I feel the same. I'm so blessed and so privileged. I have wonderful parents, a wonderful son. Even despite having gone through situations, I'm like, I'm so blessed and have so much. And being a single mom, one of the initiatives is what I want to do is to bring single moms together and help those that are actually not as blessed. So just like you, like I think that there are so many initiatives that we can do to help with this disconnect. And it can only really start with seeing the blessings that we have and being able to shine that light into others. Because we can either sit there and be like, I don't have this, I don't have that, like sit in that victim consciousness, or really see our blessings for what they are. And like you said before, we can transmute that. We can transmute it into something so beautiful and help to heal the world.
So, the overarching lesson for the coming Navratri would be this, that Mahakali, Mahalakshmi, Mahasaraswati, allow them to awaken what is dormant in you. Go from being the inert element to becoming so balanced that nothing can shake you anymore. On day one, awaken the Kali in you so that she can destroy what is not necessary anymore, and then move into the place of Lakshmi, of abundance, of prosperity, where you lose all of these self limiting beliefs, and then finally arrive at a space where you are in complete equanimity, where you're so balanced that you're unshakable. Your faith in yourself, your faith in your source is so strong. It is so fully held together by the fundament that you have arrived at your authentic self.
Nothing can ever shake that. It's because we are inherently that Shakti within. And we don't need permission. We don't need anything. Whether we're a man or a woman, we have that power and we can always reclaim it and we can tend to that fire every day, especially starting now during the Navratri. This was such an illuminating conversation and so needed, so needed. Thank you so much for your grace, your guidance, and your wisdom, Vinitaji. I am so appreciative of you, and I'm sure that all the
So
viewers
much.
are.
If I could just end with a note of blessing for everyone who tunes in, it's from an ode to Lakshmi herself from the Rig Veda. Ashum.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Wishing a
once
good
again for
night.
this opportunity, Shama.
Thank
Wishing
you.
you an
Wishing everybody
abundance of all
amazing.
things enriching, and wishing the blessings of Ma upon everyone who listens or tunes into this conversation.
Srimad Vinitaji. Thank you.